Mind Bend. Non-ordinary and extraordinary states of consciousness for Mind Bend Creative.
Yossef Sagi, thank you so much for joining me on the Mind Bend podcast today.
It's a pleasure to be here, Matthew.
Yeah, we got connected through a friend of ours, Tia Lynn, who came in here and was on the show recently. And I love how the guests that I wind up finding for the show spring organically from one connection to the next. We were just talking, this is the first time you and I have met, and we were just talking about, I moved here 2 years ago from the Midwest, and I've enjoyed what's possible here in terms of interconnectedness and a person leading to an event, leading to a friend, leading to a job opportunity, leading to another adventure. You know, I think it's something that's particular to like this part of the world. How long have you been in Los Angeles?
I first moved to Los Angeles about 22 years ago. It was short-lived, and I ended up after bouncing around, I ended up in Miami for about 6 years, and then I came back to LA, must be like 14 years ago or something like that. Yeah.
14 years on this last round. And you enjoy living here still?
I do, and it's funny because I keep sort of looking for where the grass is greener, and it's hard to find all the things I love about Los Angeles somewhere else. It's not to say that I don't love getting out of here and traveling as well, but this does feel like home base.
Yeah. Well, a feeling of home is important.
Yeah.
And I feel like when a person feels at home, they're probably more inclined to feel safe.
Right.
And I think that safety is something that is always on my mind when it comes to this overall space of consciousness, the psychedelic space in particular, letting down walls, letting other people in. And I thought that it would be germane to the overall picture to have you in today as a coach, as a guide, as somebody who holds space, who creates containers, a number of different containers that I'd like to get in to detail with you today about. But one of the things that I caught from spending some time on your website, and it sort of ties into what we were talking about, where we're from and the communities we're from. You know, where I'm from, Kansas City, and the family that I grew up in, there wasn't a whole lot of talk around where are we looking at ourselves?
Yeah.
You know, like where's the work being done to be not only introspective, but to be, I don't know, like really robust in like analysis and checking in. And one of the reasons that I talk about this now is because that's what you've highlighted as one of your offerings as a coach or a guide or a mentor, that you're able to hold that mirror and to see. And that's a beautiful thing, right? When we can see, sometimes we see in others ways that maybe they could change something about their approach or whatever they're doing easier than they can see for themselves. So talk to me about like this idea of creating space in which to see someone else, and why might that come naturally for you?
Yeah. So the question of why it might come naturally for me, I think it happens for a lot of us. Where we end up in our life is usually a response to something in our childhood. And for whatever reason in my life, I ended up holding a lot of that space for my mother in my childhood, sort of being an emotional support for her. So in one way or another, I've been a safe space for people to explore themselves and their emotions as long as I can remember. And what it takes in that space to be able to do that is, like you said, is to hold up a mirror. I don't really do too much of the work of telling people. I more ask questions and reflect to them things that are coming out of their mouth in a way that they learn and see more about themselves. And what it takes for me to be able to do that is to step out of my normal day-to-day, somewhat judgmental self into a non-judgmental space. As much as I can while I'm holding space for others to go where they need to go.
A natural proclivity to be able to hold that kind of space for your mom. I think that's something I can identify with personally, just as a person who, as a child, saw conflict in my family and people's emotional kind of eruptions and felt that very intensely, and also really wanted to quell that or help dispel that,
right.
as a peacemaker or as a listener, and those are incredible gifts for young people to embody, and we need that in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that in the direction we're going, technology, AI is going to be able to replace a lot of different things for us. And there's some things that it seems is going to be harder for AI to replace. And one of those things is how to co-regulate your nervous system with somebody else. Because you can have AI reflect and affirm you already. That's very possible. You can have like an AI therapist. But to create co-regulation, I think is one of the most valuable things. And that's why with everything that I do, I look forward to more and more in-person gatherings, the things that can't be done virtually.
Is co-regulation a good connected hug?
A good connected hug definitely provides co-regulation. If you hug someone for at least 20 seconds, like a full body-to-body hug, your body starts, both of you start releasing oxytocin. That's why it's co-regulation, right? It's good for both people. That's the beauty of co-regulation. Breathing together, touching, platonically even, all of those things create an activation of our parasympathetic nervous system in our body.
And parasympathetic nervous system, can it be said that that's something that we should be, or we would be benefited by accessing more regularly as opposed to immediately the sympathetic nervous system, where contemporary culture is spending more time?
If there's something that our body does, I don't think that there's anything wrong with it. So there is a time and a place for the sympathetic nervous system to come into and do its job. And that's usually when we're in a lot of trouble. It will get us out of that trouble. But the way that our body interprets stress these days, regardless of whether it's a car coming at us or getting a text message that says we need to talk, is the same way. Our heartbeat gets faster, our palms get sweaty. Our body, our mind can't really tell the difference between stressors. So learning to discern the stressor to see if it's something that really needs a sympathetic response or not is important. And then, yes, most of the time, the parasympathetic is going to do better for us, because the parasympathetic is going to allow us to see more. The sympathetic makes us focus on one task. And sometimes that's important, like jumping out of the way of that car. Mm-hmm. But most of the time, the more information that we can let in, the better choices we can make.
You shared a blog post with me from 2019 or 20, and I believe the title, it might be paraphrasing, is How Sex and Drugs Saved My Spirituality.
Correct.
So, the foundation for this podcast came from me working in the psychedelic space as a journalist and going to conferences and meeting people and hearing about different experiences that people were having and different modalities that can be of use to people now, and learning why they're available, why they're not available, what might be suited for somebody else, what actions is actually occurring neurochemically and spiritually when these things are happening, and then applying that to the broader picture of life too, where we're coming from before we get to those moments and how we enter the world after those moments of exercise as well, right? So, not all the guests I have on here have a direct through line into the world of psychedelics necessarily, but it's something that you do as well, and it's something that you factored into your practice and is a part of your practice as a coach. And why don't you tell us specifically, for anyone who's tuned in for psychedelic news or information, about your experiences there? Yeah,
to be clear, I don't work with psychedelics professionally. It's not part of what I offer, but it is part of what has supported me in a lot of different ways. On a personal level, I think what psychedelics have done for me is be able to give me a reference point to things I would never be able to comprehend in my own existence, in my own experience. Now, that's where the work just begins, because then the integration, which I think is really important in psychedelic work, is now that I have a compass or I have a true north to focus on, it's like, how do I get there by myself without the need of something external. But there's a lot of things in my life that I didn't even know existed before psychedelics. I didn't, or maybe I understood it or comprehended it, but didn't have an embodied experience of it. One of the big things that stands out for me is the concept of self-love. I understood self-love, but every time I tried to practice it, it was more like self-care. And treat yourself to a massage, go for a walk, do something for self-care. But self-love, radical self-acceptance was something I couldn't understand because I never felt that until the first time while on psychedelics. And then once I was there, it's not like it was like boom and it immediately was solved the problem, but I knew what to orient towards. I knew that feeling that I could put myself in that direction and know that's where I want to go. Now, at least I have a direction to go towards. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think it's important to point out too, in this particular microcosm of this conversation, that you have studied Kabbalah, and that's the tradition that you came up in studying Kabbalah for 25 years or something. Yeah. And when I think about the subtitle for the show, Non-Ordinary and Extraordinary States of Consciousness, that brings a lot of terms, a lot of concepts to mind for me: imagination, play, creativity, flow state, spirituality, mysticism. I kind of think, I'm not a scientist and I don't have no background in brain science or neuroscience, but I think about, consciousness is something that we wake up and we're conscious in the morning, and then we brush our teeth and we, start dealing with our tasks at hand. Then maybe we wind up kissing somebody that we love passionately that day, or we wind up coming around a corner and seeing the sun setting behind a palm tree, and it really kind of blows our minds, right? Or we hear or write a piece of music that's very inspiring. And I think of those little moments as non-ordinary consciousness, or consciousness that is has some extra sauce on it, potentially, right? So I have been interested in, when people talk about the Kabbalah or Kabbalism and the study there of Jewish mysticism, to put it broadly, but I've never delved into it before. Can you give us a little bit of a primer onto the concept of Kabbalah and the study and how that happens?
Sure. I think if you look into any faith, you'll notice there's exoteric and an esoteric facet to it. So we're mostly familiar with the exoteric faiths when we think of Hinduism or Islam or Christianity or Judaism. We're most familiar with the faith that we see on the outside. That's the exoteric. But each one of those, and I think every faith that you look at, has an esoteric side, which was usually developed after the faith first came through, and it's the more mystical side of it. So in Hinduism, the esoteric is Tantra, and in Islam, it's Sufism, and in Judaism, it's Kabbalah. So Kabbalah is, it can seem very, very different from a mainstream Judaism because it explores a lot of things that aren't even touched upon in the normal Jewish study, which is more a lot of laws and traditions and celebrations and how to live your day-to-day life. Whereas the esoteric study is more answers the big questions of what's our purpose here and what's beyond the physical and what's available there. And the whole, if I were to try and distill this there's just volumes and volumes of text of Kabbalah, but if I was trying to distill it, it basically comes down to this idea that this idea of us as separated beings, were originally all part of the original source. We asked to have a veil put in place over our eyes, the veil of illusion of this reality, as opposed to the undifferentiated reality, so that we could have the experience of free will, of choice, of godliness, because this is the only place in which we can
creating choice.
Create choice and create through our actions. Because in a place where everything's undifferentiated and there's no good or evil, there's no right or wrong, there's no up or down, there's no now or later, everything's just one. Well, if everything's one, you don't have free will. So you can only create from a place of separation. It's like, imagine trying to paint with clear light. You can't. But when you break the clear light up into the different colors of the rainbow, now you have colors with which to create art. So it's the same way. Like when we were undifferentiated, we couldn't do very much. So we needed to put a veil of illusion of the differentiation, bring ourselves through the other side of that prism in order to truly express our more godlike nature. Just like God created the universe, right? So how do we each create our own universe?
How is this directly related to the message of Kabbalah specifically?
That's what the whole study of Kabbalah is all about. And it talks about this concept of tikkun, which means correction, that we came, that, you know, in that differentiation, it was like a separation, it was like a breaking of the vessels is what they call it. Like imagine taking a giant vase and shattering it. And that our entire work through lifetimes and lifetimes is to rebuild that vase all together until we're one again. So that we feel like we are co-creators of the universe instead of just the created.
And how was this presented to you as a young person? Where does study begin? Where does this community or this pursuit, how does that be fostered?
Well, in my particular context, Kabbalah itself is a beautiful ancient study. In my particular context of how I learned it was as part of a cult. So when I was 10 years old, my mom joined a cult that taught Kabbalah. And like all good cults, it had a lot of really fascinating and helpful wisdom mixed with a good amount of corruption as well.
And that means that somebody was at the top making money on the efforts of everybody beneath.
Exactly. Amongst other things, but that was the main thing. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So you were putting into that and then working through that, and that was a lot about your identity.
And my entire, well, because I started when I was 10, so my entire identity was wrapped up in that. It was built, like my formative years happened there. And then by the time I was 20 and I moved to Los Angeles, I very deeply identified with that world. You also were discouraged from having a lot of contacts in the world outside. I did go to school and, you know, did some things, but the encouragement was that your friends, all of my relationship partners, everyone was people inside. Yeah.
Oh, they were all, it was that insular.
It's very insular and very, recommended that you only study Kabbalah and not other things. Yeah.
So what would you identify were your problems, your perceived problems in your life at that time?
Yeah, the perceived problems that I think it supported me with was I, as a child and as a teenager, was very much a recluse. I kept to myself. I had a rich inner world. I was very emotional. I didn't feel like I had control over my emotions. And I didn't really know a lot what to do with myself. What the identity that I got to form in this organization, especially since I started when I was really young. By the time I was in my early 20s, I was, for a young person, relatively a prodigy, you know, studying it from such an early age. So I became a teacher, and I had a lot of identity wrapped up. It built my confidence in public speaking, in leading, in sharing wisdom, things that I still value today. Right. So I would say that some of the benefits of it are what I was able to make of myself within that container. Yeah.
It seemed to, again, this simplifying it, but it seemed to come naturally for you, or it was very fluid for you, that study and that expression.
Yes.
So other people in your community saw that as well, and so you were able to have that prestige or that notoriety.
Right.
Yeah. So outside of the world, then you began to feel. I mean, we're leaping around your timeline from the little that I know about it, but getting to a certain point, you began to feel that there were pieces that were frustrating or unexplored, or that were in place that were holding you back from something that you knew needed to be accessed but wasn't thriving.
Yeah, I didn't really feel fully alive, and it wasn't something that I understood completely until exploring outside of it. Like I said, they would recommend that we didn't explore outside. So at a certain point, at the age of 25, someone gave me a book called The Multi-Orgasmic Man by Mantak Chia. And I was like partly ashamed that I even had that book.
Were you sexually active at that point?
I was to a certain degree, but there was mostly a lot of repression around sexuality there. So I had a complex relationship around my sexuality. The both feeling that that's a big part of me, and the same time feeling a lot of guilt.
You had an awareness that your sexual energy, or I don't know really how to refer to it most eloquently, but
Yes.
that your sexual nature was important to you deep inside, but it was not playing out in your daily life. It wasn't really being recognized or engaged the way that you knew it could be or should be.
I didn't know what was possible, honestly, at the time. But anytime I did explore sexually, it came with a lot of guilt. Like, I'm not supposed to do this, according to the studies. So it was a mixed relationship that I had, that mixed sort of like repression. And then I guess building a lot of taboos in the meanwhile, because what you're not allowed turns you on, right? So building a lot of like taboos and kinks and stuff like that were also repressed. So this book like fascinated me because it was a spiritual context or an energetic context of exploring sexuality. So I like would read it, but it still took me probably another 7 years before I gave myself permission to actually go and do a retreat, because I didn't want to study anything except for the study of Kabbalah. So it took me another 7 years of just like doing research online and avoiding doing research and avoiding until I finally stepped down and did a retreat around sexuality for the first time. And it's there that I recognized what I was missing. All of my study around spirituality was very heady, very rational, very scholarly, but not embodied.
Not embodied.
Not embodied. And through exploring my body, my sexual energy, the field that surrounds it through Tantra in this case, I was like, oh, there is like a whole part of me, because I was so deep in that one study, but there was a part of me that didn't get touched at all. And that came alive. And that's the other ingredient, how sex and drugs saved my
Yes, we're
spirituality.
lurking up upon
Yes.
where I'm steering this overall, because I think it is such a trip to have a body. I think it is wild to have a body.
That's right.
And I think that it's one of the areas that we all are so unique in the relationship that we have with our own bodies. I think we could sit and we could om together, we could breathe together, we can pray together. And somehow that has more in common than what it's like for us to be inhabiting these incredibly, inexplicably unique vessels, right? That we forge our personalities and our shape, part of our background. You know, it's this body.
That's right.
And it's a sexual thing specifically.
Yes.
It's capable of inherently, yes, it's capable of not only procreation but pleasure. And the pleasure is it is like foundationally, institutionally, it's misunderstood. You know, I don't remember hardly anything about orientation for me coming up as a child or a young adult with sex ed.
Yeah.
Sex ed. Beyond the diagrams of a penis and a vagina and how they work.
Yeah.
I don't remember anything, nothing stuck with me, and maybe it's just because I'm a dunce, but nothing stuck with me about like, what's that all about really? Like, what's capable there? How does it affect your mood? You know, you had a tradition that I think said this energy is best not engaged because it's either a distraction or it's like it will steer you
They didn't
wrong.
mention that it was a powerful energy to harness and use, but best used in the container of marriage.
I see. Okay. Yeah. So, but you knew somewhere that energy was something that you wanted to entertain in a fashion beyond just that construct.
Yes. There's a part of me that always knew that, and then it became very clear after I went on that first retreat. I don't love a lot of like labels and identifications, but if there's a way I identify myself today, it's a conscious hedonist. I do think that since we're here, we happen to be having this experience in our body. There's a reason for that, and my experience has been that the way that I most learn and grow, although I do grow through challenges, I grow even more so through expansion and pleasure. So our body happens to enjoy things, food, sex, experiences. There must be something to learn from
learn from it.
Yeah.
Yes, and that level of enjoyment. One of the first things that ever clicked for me when one of my earlier meditation classes and learning about Buddhism, and the idea that you could eat differently and swallow differently and hold. Be aware of flavor, be aware of the process differently, as opposed to just something you mash through, and it takes new ideas being presented to you to like turn you on. And that's one of the things I think is beautiful about, podcasting and sharing ideas and sharing conversations. Before I forget, how did the Multi-Orgasmic Man get through the force field and find its way to your shelf?
Oh, how did that end up? It was actually someone who was also a member of the same cult, and he always, for whatever reason, he fancied himself an astrologer. He was actually quite good, and he would just give me unsolicited information about myself from my astrology.
Astrologers like to do that.
Astrologers sometimes like to do that, and he said, "You have a lot of sexual energy, don't you? You think about it a lot." It's like, and I was like, "This is a weird conversation." And he's like, "I'd like to give you a book." And I was like, "Okay."
Had
thanks.
anyone ever said anything remotely close to that to you before about you?
Not someone I hadn't been intimate with. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, it was abundantly apparent for somebody you'd been
Yes.
intimate with that you were interested in your sexual
Right.
energy and the sharing of. Yeah.
Yeah.
But to somebody who was more or less a colleague, that was a shock.
Right. Yes, I didn't, because I didn't show a lot of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't show it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And again, another disclaimer here. I feel like sexual energy can be experienced as a non-ordinary consciousness. You can come into a state of non-ordinary consciousness with pleasure specifically, and that can be the pleasure of eating or the pleasure of hearing or the pleasure of making love or self-pleasure, whatever.
And long before I had my first such experience on plant medicine, I had it through tantric practice.
Yeah.
That was the first time I had one of these out-of-body journey experiences. It was actually without any medicine at all. And that sort of opened me up to understanding the possibility of other states of consciousness that I had not experienced until that point.
Yeah, well, let's go ahead and dive right into that moment, if you would, please. A moment of out-of-body experience or something beyond a consciousness that we're used to through a tantric practice. And just give us a definition of Tantra, if you would, please.
So, like I mentioned, Tantra is the esoteric study of Hinduism, and a lot of people associate it with sex, and rightly so. Both Kabbalah and Tantra actually really talk about how sexual energy is the core energy of everything, because it's the energy of creation. So a lot of what Tantra is about is how to harness that energy. The course I decided to take first, for whatever reason, wasn't Tantra 101. I jumped into the deep end, and it was a tantric bodywork course. So I went from a place of like a lot of repression to suddenly I'm in a room naked with 30-something other people, and we taking turns giving each other full body massages, including genital massage. And it was in one of those experiences when I was on the receiving end, probably my third or fourth one in over the course of, I think, 8 days, that I just lost the whole sense of where I was. I didn't recognize myself being on a mat receiving bodywork anymore. I was like on a whole journey where I felt my connection to the entire universe. I openly wept. I felt pain and pleasure and everything mixed together in a way that I hadn't felt again until plant medicine. Yeah.
I want to ask you, you weren't gate kept from that experience. You could go from 0 to level 7 by your own volition. Nobody stopped you or tried to vet you or made it difficult for you to have that experience.
Yeah, no, for whatever reason, the particular course that I took, nobody, like I came in there and I was definitely the least experienced. I knew the least about Tantra than anyone else there. What I did have was a really huge depth of experience in my particular study. I think what that did to me, I think it's a Buddhist saying maybe that all the wells feed from the same source. And what I recognized was that, maybe I'm starting this new practice, but if I just dig from the depth of the well that I was in, just horizontally across, I even though I was relatively new, I really I got it really, really quickly. I wouldn't say I get the whole study of Tantra, but I got a lot of it really quickly because everyone's really saying the same thing at the end.
Everyone's saying the same thing?
All the studies are really saying the same thing at the end of the day. Different words, different practices.
Yeah.
They're all saying the same thing. So changed out some words, and even though I was the novice in the group, it really quickly sunk in for me.
Can you summarize tantric massage easily for us?
The tantric massage is actually a relatively new practice, just several hundred years old, compared to Tantra, which is thousands of years old. And it was developed because most people these days aren't really in tune with themselves the way people used to be. And part of it is technology, and part of it is the way that we relate. And we don't spend as much time in practice like yoga and breath and all those different things. So it was developed as a way to assist people, to have someone else assist you with your own moving of your own energy. And it's a combination of body work and energy work in order to move energy up the chakra system, which is brahmacharya, which is what we do in breath work and what you do in yoga and everything, and meditation is always moving the energy upwards through the chakra system, upwards through the Sushumna Nadi, the main channel, right? And up into the crown. So that's what Tantra massage does, just having someone else assist you in that process.
When I was living in New York City, I had a friend who was studying Reiki, and she practiced with me, and that was really the first time that I had a sense of energy moving in the body.
Right.
And I know that, I had aspirations to practice myself afterwards because I thought it was a really beautiful modality. And I really loved the idea of practicing in a very unsensational manner without a lot of affectation or music or garments or anything, just like accessing the science of it, holding loving space and allowing whatever happens to happen. I love the idea of the science behind it too, but, craving, it's got to be astral projection, or it's got to be something where there's fireworks, whatever, like just trusting that something could be occurring. But that was a sensation of energy moving.
In that particular moment, yes. Most of the time it's been something more subtle, and then I've had a few standout moments as well. Yeah. I know a lot of people who are much more sensitive to energy than I am, who have experiences regularly. For me, it's more once in a while. Yeah.
So you went on the retreat and workshop course, and you're learning and exchanging and connecting with people. And what was it that you think allowed your peers to be naked with other people and to touch strangers naked, and to know that pleasure is being experienced, but to frame it in a way that was safe and responsible, beneficial, healing?
Well, that's also what everyone knew they were getting themselves into. I think that's part of it. And the way the container was framed was as a healing modality more than a sexual modality. Sure. There were extracurricular activities outside of what happened during the day, obviously, because that energy is very palpable. But it was framed as a healing modality. That being said, even though it was an amazing experience for me, turned out that school that I learned with had their own cult leanings, had their own impropriety, more around sexuality than money in this case, definitely being used in manipulative ways, right? But I think when you first go into it, like there's always, like the first time you step into something new, sometimes you see, especially if you're really open at that time and you're looking, you're searching, you're going to see what you want to find. Yeah. So you find the good, and and there was plenty of good around it. And nothing is like all good or all bad. There's plenty of good there. And I wouldn't be able to recommend it these days to someone else.
I know that the people who came to that particular event knew that it was a healing, or there was like a coursework and format to it. But what do you think made those particular human beings and you yourself able to be naked with others and to touch others, as opposed to somebody who isn't, or who that really triggers in a way that's uncomfortable for them?
I think the better way for me to speak about this is how I do it at my events. Because it's the same thing. In order for you to feel vulnerable and expressed, you first need to feel safe. If you don't feel safe, it's going to be very hard for you to open up, be vulnerable, undress your body or your heart, for that matter, and let people see all of you. So there's a certain container that requires a feeling of safety first. Yeah.
Do most people consider, this is a general, I'm not saying this is a definitive statement, but do most people feel like the safe container that they have for their sexuality is their relationship?
Exactly. So for most people, they explore within their relationship because that feels safe. It feels like someone who already knows so much of me, and I feel relatively safe with this person, so I'll explore there. Exploring outside of a relationship is not, your sexuality isn't typical. It is very edgy for people. So how do you create an environment that both provides safety and encourages vulnerability at the same time?
Yes, and I want to get more into that with you and have you paint a picture for our audience of these structures that you've worked to curate, because you've taken everything you've learned and you're applying it in a way that is kind of the world that you want to see. It's the environment that you want to see. I carry with me guilt about my sexuality because I was coming up, I had a lot of body shame and a lot of stuff I was made fun of physically, and like really made to like identify problems with my anatomy, my physiology, and felt very unattractive and undesirable in my vessel, right? And then there came a point where I started having access to sex. And then I just wanted it all the time and really did it in an unskillful fashion. But I hurt people in relationship because I couldn't be like a lockdown partner in my early 20s, but I was voraciously going after every opportunity. And I did really feel like it was something that, yes, I could meet you and enjoy you and then want to have a sexual experience with you. And then that could be it. And then I could move on to something else. I didn't have that kind of thing that pulled me into what was mostly represented by my peers and what people were expected to engage in with. And I really didn't know. It was just, it's a point of shame. That's primarily what it is. And so when I hear about communities that are able to, express, hey, there's a sexual spark here, or there's a sexual energy, and I'm down to explore it with you. That seems like extraordinarily far off, fantastical, and like not for a person like me. That's kind of like, that's how has always sort of like, that's how it feels when I hear about it. And I really never heard about anything like that back home,
I would argue that it's exactly for you, because my containers that I create aren't about hooking up. They're about finding the facets of yourself where there still is shame, and shining a light on it and working through it. So the purpose to come to my event isn't to hook up with someone. The purpose to come to my event is for it to stir up the shame, so you can look at it, you can feel it, and then you can release it.
Okay, so let's go ahead and go right into, you are putting events on. You've taken everything you've learned out in the world, Tantra, Kabbalah, being a social person, having friends, having relationships, and you're curating an environment, and you have a name for it, and there's a structure to it, and there's a schedule, and it's part of your life's work right now. Let's lay it all out there.
It's all my life's work. So Mystery Temple, which is the event you're talking about, is just one of the things, but it's the work that I do one-on-one with individuals. It's work that I do with couples. I do smaller workshops than Mystery Temple as well. What I feel very drawn to supporting people with these days, and it's still because I'm healing that part inside of myself, is eradicating shame around sexuality, because it is such a big part of who we are, and it's the part that most of us tends to hide. So why would we hide such a big part of ourself, the part of ourself that actually creates life, the part of ourself that energizes us, the part of ourself that holds such a big key to our desires, and desire is what motivates us, right? So if shame is covering that, it really stunts us in a lot of different ways. And that's why I care to work on that so much. What Mystery Temple is particularly is a normalization of our sexual expression around other people. Because I do work with people one-on-one, and then they'll have homework and they'll have to show up in the world and do it, or with couples or whatever I do. But this is an immersive experience where people come together and have an opportunity, a zero pressure but high opportunity, to be fully expressed in all of their ways, including their sexuality, and be witnessed in it without judgment. Right? That's powerful. So what if you found this one of the facets inside of you where you still have shame around your sexuality or otherwise, and you got to go into this container and be fully expressed in it, and then recognize that there was nothing to be ashamed about? You would release it so quickly. And you also witness and you look around, it's like everybody else is also being shameless, or they have shame and they're leaning into it. The container that I create is designed to meet people where they're at and let them take at least one step outside their comfort zone into their edge. Baby steps.
Where do you see, through your personal one-on-one work and potentially in group work, what's the feedback you're getting about how shame or guilt or repressed emotion, how is that manifesting in people's lives? And because I think it's something that will come up for people when they're having a psychedelic experience also, or any kind of deep therapeutic healing experience, breath work or meditation or any other kind of modality. Like, how are you seeing that present?
How does the shame present in
Yes.
people's life? People play small. There's just part of themselves that they don't show. Maybe the shame has something to do with rejection. And if you have a fear of rejection, then you don't ask for what you want. And that's not just around sexuality. It's how you show up somewhere is how you show up everywhere. So where else in your life are you not asking for what you want, or not putting yourself out there because you're afraid of rejection? Right? So that's one area. I also believe that any desire, all desires are normal. The desire itself is normal. If a desire doesn't have a healthy outlet, then it will come out in an unhealthy way. And a healthy outlet doesn't mean you act on your desires necessarily, but it means at least to put it out there, to speak it out. So one of the Mystery Temple has different themes, and each theme is around a different type of deconditioning around our sexuality. One of them is called Wildest Dreams.
Every theme really is specifically around deconditioning.
Is around deconditioning shame from sexuality. So my most recent one was called Sacrilegious. It was specifically around religious deconditioning. I had one called Wildest Dreams, which is about owning your desires and speaking them out, right? At least be aware of it and speak it out, even if you don't act on it. Because when you just hide it, it festers. And when it festers, it's going to come out one way or another. And usually it will come out in an unhealthy way, in a way that hurts others. Right? So what if we just spoke them aloud? All the weird things that we think that only we like. If we just spoke it out loud, right? So that's another theme. And I have 6 themes that rotate throughout the year for Mystery Temple, particularly, to meet all these different parts of ourselves.
I wanted to ask you about energy harnessing, that notion of working with an energy that exists or potentially changing it. Like, how do you view, like, from everything you've learned scientifically, mythologically, how do you view the body as an energetic thing? Like, just touch base with us on energy and the body as an energetic entity.
Yeah. That's a great question. This is really what the study of somatics is all about. I think most of us identify that everything we know about ourselves is in our minds. But our mind doesn't store all the information. We have plenty of neural clusters throughout our body, in our muscles, in our gut, in different places. So only part of our neural matter is in our brain. There's plenty in the body. And the body remembers things in different ways than the brain does. The brain remembers something through a picture or sound, right? Perhaps. But sometimes we're in a situation we don't have a memory of us being uncomfortable about, but the body remembers it, right? And that's where PTSD comes in, right? Where your body just knows, your body seizes up. And what somatic study is all about these days and somatic practices is connecting to the wisdom that the body has to give us. So talking about like moving energy, that sounds very spiritual, and definitely, I mean, the mystics have talked about it for so long, but everything that they've said is reinforced by the more modern study of somatics. There's parts of our body in particular that tend to store trauma. And maybe you have an experience where you get body work or you work out a little bit extra hard and your muscles get exhausted and you suddenly cry and you don't know why, because that emotion was stored there. Why is emotion coming out when we run and you push yourself extra? Because the emotion's stored in our body, and it tends to be stored in these trauma bands in our body, particularly around the chest and the pelvis area, the sides of our body, right, our thighs. So there's certain parts of our body that store these traumas, and then they're released. They're released through physical experiences, not just through talk therapy. So there's so much wisdom there. And some of the places that store the most trauma is, like I said, in the pelvis and in the genitals. And that's why a lot of people, when they have sex, it becomes a very emotional experience, because just the physical movement of these areas that we don't really activate them except during sex. Like, we don't get pelvic massages in the United States. It's not appropriate, right? To get that. But we all have a very complex pelvic floor with a lot of muscles that stores a lot of trauma that never gets any action except when you're sexually active.
Yeah.
Right? And then everything's released. So what if we could be more intentional around how we connect with that part of our body?
Where is this accessing people? How are people coming in? Because I think about my family, for instance, and I know how deep the aversion would be to considering an environment where sexual energy is explored.
Yeah.
But just what you're talking about, like my mom died last month from ovarian cancer, 8 years. And I just, I don't know why cancer happens. After moving to Los Angeles, I've produced so many podcasts and I've sat in on so many conversations about the body keeps the score and somatic practice. And I think about ovarian cancer, and I think about like my mom's nerves, and her tension and what I could feel in her, and her aspirations and her giving and her energetic matrix and her personality. And, I think that, and that's that's that procreative, that's right. Such a powerful region. And it's a conversation that I could never have.
Yeah.
Like I could never have checked in with her 20 years ago, or when I was going through what I was going through at the time, which also involved like substance use, in an unskillful and destructive way. But, we couldn't have had conversations about what is your sexual expression mean right now? Or I don't know if she had any peers to check in about with her either, And how is this? I'm trying to connect dots, not sloppy, but sincerely. Where are people learning to have this conversation? How can it happen differently so that our intelligence can open up to more ideas that can, instead of feeling shameful about approaching them, can become more accessible, more commonplace?
First of all, I'm sorry to hear about your mom. I'm sorry about her passing. I'm sorry about the obvious frustration over not feeling like you can connect with her and support her through something that you knew that she could help herself. And she's not alone in that. That's the overall perspective that most of us still have around sexuality. It's too taboo to talk about. We don't talk about that. My experience has been that the things that are most taboo are usually the things that are most powerful. That's why people don't want to talk about them. And there's something there. There's been just generation after generation of repression around sexuality that was built through patriarchy and organized religion and all the other stuff. So there's many, many layers. And like, I've been in this work for a long time, and I'm still meeting myself in my places of shame. So it's not something that's going to happen overnight, but the fact that we're having this conversation now, and my hope is the events that I do, like that people get activated in those spaces, and I give them tools and equip them to communicate around their sexuality. They go forth and share those with other people in their interactions. Everything. And I also think that the best approach to unraveling is a slow and safe way to do it. If we try and just like break through it all, there's going to be collateral damage. So it doesn't have to take as long as it took to build up. But it's a step-by-step consciousness around anything shifts in a bell curve. You know, there's the people that get to it first, and there's always the stragglers, but the majority of the people come somewhere in the middle. And I think that we're starting to move up that bell curve. There's a lot of less shame around sexuality. There are a lot more podcasts about it. There's more parts of the world that are open to talk about it. People are a lot more open about talking about. Tantra has been a great introduction of sex into the world because of its spiritual nature and personal development nature, made it comfortable for people. Now you see people talking about conscious kink more and more. Mm-hmm. I think that linking sexuality into something conscious, something that's a spiritual practice, makes it feel safer for people to explore it nowadays. I think that there's plenty of opportunity to just enjoy sex for what it is, and that might still feel edgy for people, but seeing it being something that, well, it can help you with your life, that gives people encouragement to talk about it more.
Is desire, our aesthetics, our traits that one looks for, or I'm not enough this, or they're not enough this for me? Like, how does that work into this energy source also? Because that seems petty, and this seems magisterial, you know, like this seems like, oh, that's unfortunate, and that's not as elegant a piece of this, like, tapping into the greater picture.
Yeah. So from a tantric perspective, they say that whoever you choose to interact with, in that moment, they're the entire universe for you. You transmute them into something beyond the self. You transmute them into a blueprint of the universe. And so, for instance, when I was in this course and we're doing body work, there's a lot of different bodies, a lot of different people, right? And the work there was really whoever I'm with, to make everything around that person dissolve and to see the divine in them. So that's great as a spiritual practice. I do think that it's important with whoever you choose to interact with that you still are a fuck yes in your body and interacting with them, and you're not.
That's based on attraction?
And that can be based on attraction, but attraction is complex because there's the first sight attraction that you get, which is usually based off of certain patterns and conditioning. And then there's a different attraction that comes in when you get to know someone.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So the main thing I would say about attraction is get to know someone a little bit more and see. Maybe someone that was at first attractive becomes less attractive. Maybe someone that was less attractive becomes more attractive.
Yeah.
Right? So attraction is more than just the physical. It's partly physical, but it's more than just the physical.
Yes, and that's something that's explored in the containers that you're creating?
I definitely encourage it.
Yeah.
And I encourage it in some containers that I create. The pairings, everything's always consensual and there's no pressure to do anything. I want to state that. But in some of the containers that I do, there's sort of randomized pairings sometimes for some practices, for some of the more basic practices, starting with eye gazing, sensual touch. Why couldn't you do that with anybody?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that's powerful. I had never had just an eye gazing like exercise or been a part of that before. I did shortly after I moved out here. I got invited to a camping event outdoors, and it was a lot more, I guess, erotic than I anticipated it being. Right, but we did have like a group eye gazing, and I'm gonna start crying if I think about it too much. But how beautiful it was to be able to walk around in this circle and really stop in front of other people you didn't know, and connect, men and women and everybody, and connect deeply and intimately out of nowhere. You know, what a powerful thing.
That's right.
And I think it's something that, like, if more people had the opportunity to do, not if they were fortunate to be invited to this camp out and get to go, like, oh my goodness. Like, and that's what I get excited about, like the future. And I want to ask you before we conclude about like your plans for where the work is evolving. But like, you know, we're talking about AI and we're talking about space, but like there's so many things that we just haven't gotten in the habit of doing like interpersonally yet that can blow your mind. I mean, psychedelics is a part of that world, and medicine rituals and the communities that it takes to really maximize those experiences. But like just something as simple as eye gazing and that energy and that intimacy. So where do you see like the future of intimacy and the discussion around it, and what are your plans for your work as you look to the future, as much as you're willing to?
Yeah, it's a great question. My partner is a futurist and a visionary, and she works with AI, and she does amazing things with AI in a very conscious way, which I appreciate. I feel like a balancing force in that of, which is funny because I was more tech savvy when I was younger, but I see myself more moving away from that. Not against it. I think there's great uses of it, but spending more time in person with each other is going to become more and more important the easier it becomes not to spend time with each other. Right? So we have phones. I can hear your voice from far away, and then and then there's like camera phones. So now I can see your face as well. And as the technology improves, you'll be able to maybe have a hologram of the person with you, or maybe you'll be able to have tactical feedback as well, kinesthetic feedback of another person, and you might as well feel like you're in the room with that person, right? Or close to it. So the more that we find ways to not have to be close with each other, I think it's an important balancing force to spend time with each other. For that nervous system regulation, for that special magic that only happens when you're really in space with someone else. We have an energy field.
Yeah.
And I don't know if AI will be able to transmit our energy field.
Yeah. Yeah, it is special. And for whatever repression or conversations that weren't had in my Catholic family coming up, we definitely hugged and kissed each other. You know, that was important. I kissed my grandfather, you know, and he kissed me, and we weren't afraid. And I love hugging, you know, and I certainly felt that void of physical contact, you know, in 2020, and I'm so grateful for, you know, still it feels fresh to re-engage socially, you know, and to be with other people in community. I want to thank you so much for coming on. I mean, there's a lot more I could ask. I want to respect your time, but I think we've covered a fair amount of what I hope to get into today. And just, again, affirm that whatever we're doing, whether it's psychedelics or whether it's parenting or whether it's, you know, having a friendship, there's always a lot that goes into the consideration of how to do it in a way that is beneficial to yourself and to others. And we're always bringing what we've got in us to those situations as well. And our sexuality, our sexual energy, our sexual awareness and orientation is always a part of that. And so I appreciate the opportunity to work that component of being a human being into this space. So thanks for being willing to go there with me today.
Thanks for having me.
How can people connect with you and continue to learn about the work you're doing?
The best ways are either on my Instagram or my website. Both of them, you just got to spell my name right, Yossef Sagi. Maybe you'll write it or something like that.
We will.
Yeah. So those are the best ways to find me, on my Instagram or my website.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.